All right. Good morning, afternoon, evening to everyone who's joining us today. I know this is a recorded webinar, so for whenever you're watching this, we're grateful to have you here. I'll go through introductions here just real quick, but our topic today is why your commission structure is costing you revenue and how to fix it. So just a quick introduction about myself and Spiff. My name is Tanner Lacey. I'm one of the co-founders and the head of go-to-market strategy here at Spiff. For any of you who do not know, Spiff is focused and obsessed with creating trust and transparency between finance, sales, and operations orgs by automating the commission process or sales compensation, sales performance management software that's aimed at making life easy and improving the performance and overall satisfaction of your teams. So really excited to dive in here today and again on a topic that's really interesting, right? Why your commission structure is costing you revenue and how to fix it. So let's go ahead and dive in. To actually kick this off, let's actually do like a quick little math problem together, right? And everyone here, bear with me. This is my first fully recorded webinar, so I'm here at my house recording this. I'm generally a little bit more of a back and forth person, so bear through the awkwardness with me. We'll get through this together, I promise. So to start off, I do want to ask you a question, right? And I want you to kind of follow along with me here if you can. So I want to figure out how much money you're potentially losing because of your comp plan at your organization. And to do that, I've pulled just a kind of a random size here, 40 sales reps with an average salary and OTE of 115,000. Take a second now and see if you can figure out those numbers for yourself so you can follow along, or this is recorded, right? So you can go back and look through it as well. And we'll send happy to send these slides over to you if that's helpful too. Anyways, our example company, again, 40 sales reps with the average OTE of $115,000. So first things first, let me move my little thing out of the way here. Let's talk about just general attrition, right? On average, you're going to lose about 35% of people of your sales team a year. And one thing I should have said a little bit earlier, but I'll say here, we're going to be playing the law of averages throughout this presentation. So keep that in mind. Every situation is a little different. Each organization, sales cycle, et cetera, it's going to have a little bit different numbers, but everything that we're pulling is backed up by studies, or I'm pulling from different sources, and we will be giving those sources out if you're interested. So again, keep that in mind, but we are going to play the averages here, and averages tend to work pretty well. So in average, you lose about 35% of your people a year. So in our example company here, 40 reps, we will have about 14 reps who will just leave this year for one reason or another. Now, out of those 14 reps, right, 35 to 89% of that 14 will leave because of comp-related issues. It's a pretty wide range. I understand, again, very, very dependent on your organization and your industry. But what we see is usually around 60%. So I pulled that number as far as what I'm going to use here for my example company here. And out of those 14 reps who churns, that means that 9 will have left because of bad compensation. So around 9 sales reps will leave your average organization of 40 sales reps because of comp-related issues. Now, there's two different types of costs, right? There's one that's a little bit easier to calculate here. We're going to do that first. So generally speaking, it costs about 50% to 80% of a rep's salary to replace a fully ramped rep. So that means if, again, following our little math equation here in this box below, for those 9 that we're losing, that 65% replacement cost times 115K salary or OTE gets us to about $673,000 in hard costs for replacing these ramped reps, right? So that's going to be your recruiting fees, what you're paying your managers to do interviews, what you're paying for them to do in equipment or in new training, software licenses, et cetera. It's about what it's going to cost for you to get that new rep in the door. Now, what's really interesting, what we don't actually look at a lot, we always hear those numbers, right? Where it's like, oh, 80% of it takes a year and 80% of that person's OT to replace them, or maybe even more than that, right? But the one thing that we don't always focus on is that your average AE, kind of depending on, again, your organization, performs at their best about 60% of a fully ramped AE. So meaning if you hire a new AE, it's going to take them about about a year probably to get to where they need to be, 5 months, again, depending on where you're at. But generally speaking, if you can get them to 60% of quota in that first 12 months, that's pretty good. So let's assume in this company that we're talking about that they have $1 million quota, right? Pretty standard to get kind of middle ground there for the industry. But what that means, if you think about it, is that if your best ramping reps are performing at 60%, that means you lose about $400,000 of potential quota requirement for each of those reps that you lost. So what that turns into is a lost $3.6 million in potential revenue. So let's pause there for a second and just call that out. Remember, we're talking about a company here that's about 40 sales reps, which means that they're probably about 150 people total, maybe a little bit bigger than that, maybe 200. That's pretty big. I mean, a $3.6 million, I mean, any company would probably be fine to find that under the rug, but especially for a company that large, or that small, sorry, that's a huge amount of potential that you're leaving there on the table. So just as a quick recap, again, our company, 40 sales reps, quota of 1 million, OTE of 115K. Because we lost 9 reps to comp related issues, the hard cost is 673,000 and the opportunity cost is 3.6 million. So, I mean, all in, that's a cost of over $4 million, right? So now, like, we talk about this, I've gone to so many different presentations. We're like, okay, thanks. Thank you for the problems. Thank you for highlighting like these awesome numbers and facts. That's great. But let's actually talk about a few things that I think are really interesting. So I want to talk with you about how we cut that number in half for you. So let's be realistic. You're not going to make everyone happy, and not everyone's a great fit, right? So we need to keep that in mind, and I want to be realistic in here. But I've laid out 5 different things for you to look at and to think through. And hopefully one of these, and generally speaking, one of them will give you an opportunity to cut this number in half, or at least take a decent chunk out of that to get some of that money back. So let's read through these real quick, and then I want you just to kind of take a second, and I'll go through this exercise here in a minute. But the first thing we're going to look at is how often are you updating the numbers for your reps, right? So how often are they seeing their comp plans in action? Are you using team-based incentive plans? Are you using accelerators? Are you currently capping commissions? And do your reps currently understand the comp plan? So what I want you to do, just take a second, bear with me. I know usually this is something where I'd post a poll up, but rate yourself on kind of a 1 to 5, 1 being worse, 5 being the best. Like, how are you doing this, or are you currently doing this for each of these different sections here? So I'll give you a second to do that. Sit with me awkwardly in silence for 5 seconds. Perfect. Like I said, we'll all get through the awkwardness together. So let's go ahead and let's dive in these. And I want you to, like, my goal here is to give you a couple of actionable items to take away so that you can go ahead and cut some of this number out of that cost that you're currently taking in. So do you update numbers for your reps regularly? What we're trying to say here is, how often do they actually know where they're at in their performance? So a couple quick facts for you. 85% of millennials, which probably make up a good chunk of your current sales organizations, say that they will be more confident with more consistent views into performance. And 83% of employees found that timely recognition to be more fulfilling than financial rewards and gifts. So a couple of things I want to call out here. First one, I know it probably goes without saying, it's just interesting to always call out that people do care about looking to see how they're performing. And sometimes it's really easy to overlook that. What I thought was really interesting in this other study here, that 83% of employees found timely recognition to be more fulfilling, is that they're actually saying that, like, the dopamine hit of just timely recognition versus the actual dollar in their bank account is actually greater for the majority of people. Now, granted, that doesn't mean that you can replace commissions with timely recognition, but I think that's important to call out if you're trying to look at the effectiveness and to drive down the attrition of your sales org. I had a really good experience one time. My job before Spiff, I was running a sales team at a call center, putting myself through college. And I had a great mentor and a great manager who gave me an opportunity to play with a comp plan. This is generally when I kind of believe that my unhealthy obsession with compensation probably began, right? So, but in this time we did a few things. The comp plan that they had there wasn't bad. It was based off of a pretty standard KPI for call centers, revenue per call. But there was a tricky part. One, it was very fluctuating. So each month was seasonal. And so the numbers would fluctuate off of a forecast. That's actually fine. What was hard though was the fact that generally speaking, you didn't know what those numbers would be until the second or third week of the month. And then also that it was about a 2 to 3 day delay generally to get the feedback for those reps to see where they're at, which I mean is actually not too bad in some respects. But also the numbers could shift like really rapidly without them knowing, because there was things like quality scores and other things that were really hard to keep track of. So there's a couple things we did. So first thing, we did change the KPI. That's not what I want to focus here on this story. I'll bring that up a little bit more probably later in this presentation. But the one thing that we did do is we created it so it was standard. So each month they knew exactly what their goal was before they started. And it was a goal that was based on the revenue that they were bringing in. And second, we did hourly updates via just an Excel sheet and a macro. So Excel can do this for you. There's lots of different tools that can do it. Chances are you also probably have something in your tech stack today that could do this for you. But what we were doing is we were just sending hourly updates. I'd pull it from our data warehouse. The macro would run the calcs, and then I would click a button. It would send it out to our entire team. So what that did is it gave everyone the up to the hour, at least a few times a day, like update to where they were at and how much money they were potentially earning. The bonus system there was kind of this is how much you earn extra per hour this month if you keep these numbers. So it was really, really helpful for them to see how much money they'd earned and how much money they could be earning if they hit that. And with this experience, we saw about a 10 to 15% increase in performance across the board. And even though I don't have the quantifiable data to back this up, I do know for a fact that the morale and the rapport of that team improved significantly after that, and that we did see a lower attrition on that team in general. Call centers have really high attrition anyway, so it's hard to kind of gauge that. But on my team, I really didn't lose that many people. So moving on here, let's talk about one more thing. Actually, let me go one back. Again, if there's anything here that's helpful, write it down, take some notes. We're looking for just small little low-hanging fruit here for you to cut down on the attrition number. And again, for me, this worked well, but something that's often quick and easy to do, something that's already available in your systems, is to find a way to make sure that your reps understand where they're at and how they're performing, and on a much more consistent or even real-time basis. All right, next one for us to take a look at that's really interesting is, are you currently using team-based incentive plans? Right now, I want to be clear on this. I'm not advocating for using a complete team-based incentive plan here. What I'm talking about generally here is, are you using any type of team incentive, meaning just a small portion or even a spiff or bonus of this? So right now, what you're seeing is 83% of companies report that team-based plans are effective. Great, cool, that's helpful, right? But what's really interesting, just to add on to this, is 85% of Fortune 1000 companies use team-based pay. Now, not everything that the Fortune 1000 does is something we should all be trying to copy, but that's a pretty big majority. And I think what's really interesting, and I'm just going to read this quote, it's recorded, so you guys can all bear with me, right? But fueling this interest is the perception that such pay systems are likely to enhance members' pro-social behaviors and as a result boost members' capabilities, flexibilities, responsiveness, and productivity. Among many benefits, teams-based rewards can foster collaboration and teamwork, allow team goals to be clearly integrated with organizational objectives, and provide incentive for the whole team to improve. So this is brought on by Northwestern, which is really interesting. I have the study linked here. And what it basically is saying is that the morale of a team helps drive performance, and also morale and teamwork, like whole collaboration, is extremely effective. I recently, one of the last books I reread was the Extreme Ownership. And think what you will about the book. I'm a big fan personally, but there's a piece of this that's really interesting. And a part of it was, and as I was reading this, it talks a lot about the morale on those teams and the effectiveness of those teams. And even though they go through some of the worst times and experiences that could possibly happen, um, those teams perform and they love each other. They love working together and they stick together. There's also I recently did some more research on some social hierarchies for comp plans. And it was found that a lot of people, when they come back from these warlike experiences, actually have like a longing to go back because of that team base. There's something about having a group of people focused on solving a goal that we crave just as natural people, right? So this is something you can really tap into for your teams. Do they actually feel like they're working together to get to this goal? Again, something to keep in mind. Oftentimes, what I think you'll see is like a quick spiff. Like if the team hits their goal, everyone gets a $500 bonus, right? If the team all gets above this quality score, or makes this many calls, or hits their activities, we're going to go to dinner. It doesn't have to be dollar-based. It can be a lot of different things, but it's a really, really easy and simple way to drive that camaraderie, that collaboration, and like we're trying to do, drive down attrition for your team. Once you build that loyalty, it's healthy for everyone. So you're not gaming the system. You're just creating a safer place for people to work and the place they want to be. All right, moving on to the next one here. Are you using accelerators? So something that's becoming like, this is increasing quite a bit, especially if you're in kind of like the SaaS tech world. You're starting to see accelerators happen fairly often. But accelerators are shown to lead to a 17% increase in annual sales. Now, I thought this was interesting. I actually ripped this diagram off here of a Harvard article. If you look down at the bottom, it says accelerators or overachievement commission ramped up. Overachievement commissions ramp up the pay to top performing, creating a progressive structure. And it talks a lot in this same article about kind of creating that progressive structure and what that does. And what accelerators do is they drive your top performers to not only stay, but to do better. So I know we're talking on some average numbers here on how you potentially decrease the cost of attrition. But if your top performers are incentivized to stay and to keep selling or to keep doing their job more because of these accelerators, that's going to pay dividends for you. So what do our accelerators, what could we be doing here, right? There's a lot of different ways to do this. So one of the questions I get asked often, and I'm going to assume this probably would have come up in a Q&A if we were doing this live, is how and when should I do accelerators, right? A lot of companies, for good reason, stick on a pretty standard accelerator schedule where you have an annual quota. Once you hit quota, you hit some sort of accelerator. Usually we call it marginal is kind of the buzzword for that, or like tax bracketing, where it's a future facing accelerator. So everything after 100 is worth X percent. Or X percent more than it was before you hit quota. That's a great way to do it. And I'm not going to actually say that there's necessarily a better or worse way to, or say anything wrong about that type of style of accelerator, but I want to push you a little bit. One thing to potentially think about playing with is moving to, still with keeping your annual goals, but thinking about playing with quarterly accelerators or even monthly accelerators, depending on your sales cycle. Oftentimes, one of the things that we struggle with is sandbagging towards the end of the year. Also, just kind of playing the game and working with your compensation. And also, like, the drive for compensation often loses its luster if you leave it too stagnant for too long, right? Like, people tend to, for lots of reasons, tend to close lots of deals at the end of the year. But you better believe that part of that is the urgency to hit their goal. Now, if you're going to spread that out throughout the year and do things like quarterly accelerators, that might be smaller than what it would be on the annual basis, but, or maybe it might even be like a little bit different from what their actual comp plan or quota is related to. Those different things can have huge increases, not only on performance, but also on the morale of your people. And it keeps them coming back, right? So it's a nice reset. If someone's having a rough year, it's hard to bounce back from that. If someone's having a rough quarter and performance is somewhat measured on a quarterly basis, it's a much easier way to bounce back from that. So again, take it for what it's worth. It's very dependent on, again, on your sales cycle, your culture, your structure, but something to potentially play with there as a suggestion to decrease attrition by adjusting your accelerator schedule or putting them in there at all. Now, this one again is going away a little bit more. but it's a huge one to call out as well. So right now, are you currently capping commissions? There's a lot of data out here on this one. And I pulled a couple of quotes again that I found pretty impactful. So 79% of managers without commission caps were reported to hit or exceed their goal. That's pretty, I mean, pretty significant, right? So you can take it, I believe the study was done with about 1,000 companies. I'll send this link here. But that's a very significant amount of people who hit their goal without capped commissions. And you also saw that removing caps from commissions can improve revenue up to 9%. So in all these things that I'm listing out, I put them in a order for a reason. This is one of my last ones I'm going to touch on. And the reason being is if you're still capping commissions, I'm sure you have a fiscal and liability led reason to why you're doing so. And I totally and completely understand. What I would look at though, and what I would potentially challenge you is to shift the mindset just a little bit. When you cap commissions, you inherently go against nature for coin operated salespeople. And not everyone is completely like that. I'm being very stereotypical there when we're talking about sales organizations. But remember that if you set up your compensation correctly, even if you have to lower the percentages on the lower end of that achievement, if they're bringing in more money, you should also be making more money. If you're not, then there's something wrong with your comp plan and your comp structure. So removing caps and commissioning can improve revenue up to 9%. So think about that as you're doing this. I understand that sometimes there are reasons why you have to cap commission. Sometimes things are so big especially if you're like a big enterprise org, if you're really in huge deals, there may have to be commission caps just for general liability. Again, another way to look at that is to maybe spread out those commission payments throughout time, or find ways to decrease that liability while also keeping your salespeople happy. And looking for ways to improve this. Removing sales commission caps are one of the leading reasons why people lose salespeople today. So if this is something in there, again, it's a great thing to look at and a great thing to play at and have a good conversation with your entire organization to see how you could potentially get rid of those commission caps. And the last kind of topic here I want to talk on is, do your reps understand their comp plan, right? So only 22% of companies will tell you that most of their employees understand their comp plan. Now, that's crazy. And just to make sure I cite this one for you, this is from World at Work, like one of the leading compensation groups in the world. I was at their conference in Phoenix and Chicago just these last couple of weeks. These people know comp. And as of 2016, only 22% of companies, if you pulled them out of a hat, would say, yeah, most of my employees understand how they're getting paid. Like, let that sink in there for a second. And let's also be very introspective and realistic and kind of figure out where we sit. It's very easy to assume that people understand their comp plan. Whenever I consult or talk to people about this on the side, I mean, it's so much easier said than done. Like, we'll always kind of hit over and over again the fact of like, keep your plan as simple as possible. But sometimes it's just not that easy. Sometimes comp has to be a little bit complicated, right? Depending on what you're selling, who you're selling to, and how long it takes. So one thing that I would challenge you to do is, one, make sure that your managers are talking about the comp plans often. If it does have to be complex, then make sure that you at least have some enablement and some of the complexities simplified for your sales team to understand it. A good goal for me is always if a salesperson can describe their comp plan in 2 to 3 sentences. If it's much more than that, then I'm probably overcomplicating it and they actually don't understand. Now, let's remember that comp is, like, at its core meant to be motivating. Compensation and variable comp from the beginning of time drove behavior, right? Like we have lived on a variable comp system since we started trading currency for goods. I don't know, I guess thousands and thousands of years ago. And the concept that, like, if someone doesn't know what they're going to get paid, that they'll still do the work is kind of funny. If you're starting to feel like you have an attrition problem or a performance problem, you may actually have a comp plan problem. Now, that's not always the case. Again, I'm being stereotypical here on this, but take some time and figure out like, hey, how much do they actually understand? And there's some easy ways to combat this as well. One, you're like, again, we talked about it quickly. Your managers should be powered with enablement and should be talking about it consistently. This goes a lot in line with what we talked about on our first topic here about how often do they see their numbers. Like, just make sure people are talking about it. Make sure people get a document or some sort of illustration on how it works. And whether it's a software like Spiff or something like Salesforce, or really like there's so many different softwares out there that you're using to enable your sales team. There's ways to identify the different KPIs and triggers that happen in your comp plan in those different tools. Tons of forecasting tools, even things like Outreach, SalesLoft, et cetera. You can do a lot with there to measure that performance. And then it's easier for them to understand how that ties to their comp plan. Again, we should all be shooting to be in that 22%, or like, I guess let's actually try to get rid of that 22%. It's going to be important that we get rid of this if we want to have people stay on our team and to gain that, to remove some of that cost from our organization. So, and also just in general, it's a good practice, right? So now, like, again, let's actually, as we finish off here, I want to run through this formula one more time. We've now talked about 5 or so things here that can really help you to decrease the amount of churn and attrition you're having from your comp plan. I really hope that you're able to take 1 to 2 action items from that. And now let's assume that you do, and let's go play this. Let's kind of go play the numbers again and see what happens. So again, we're going to make the same assumptions: 40-person team, $1 million quota, and the 150K OTE. It's the same thing. I would love if you haven't already to work through this with me. But let's just pretend that instead of losing 9, we lose 5 reps, right? So we save a few reps here. So as mentioned, it costs anywhere between 50 to 80% of salary. So what that happens is when we cut that number down, you go from 673,000 to 374,000. You almost cut that number in half. Right, which makes sense. We cut the numbers in half. This is a hard cost. It's a fairly straightforward formula, so probably not that surprising there. Now, again, what I think we don't spend enough time talking about and thinking about is when we lose those 5 reps instead of 9, we keep 4 fully ramped reps for a year longer. That's an additional $400,000 per rep. So in reality, we only lost 2 million instead of 3.6 million here. So, I mean, again, it's a huge amount of money that we potentially leave on the table. Now, instead of losing 374, we lose, instead of losing 673, we lose 374. Instead of losing 3.6, we lose 2 million. So we save 299,000 in hard costs and 1.6 million in opportunity costs. All right, huge change there. Now, overall, guys, there's an opportunity for you to get $2 to $3 million back in your revenue this year by keeping your people. And one of the best ways to keep people on your sales team is to find ways to compensate them correctly. Compensation can be one of the best or worst things about your organization. And we should all be striving for a time where that's our best, right? It's something that we can get right. There's not a perfect formula. There's not a perfect way to do it ever. There is an art to it, just like there is a science. A lot of that art can still be data driven, but part of that needs to come from listening, making sure that you're actually like getting things into their hands, making sure that you're enabling your team to understand that comp plan. Your comp plan can be costing you revenue, and there's no better time than now to fix that, especially as you're going into 2022 planning. Take this opportunity to go talk to your reps, see how many of them understand their comp plan, see how many of them are happy with their comp plan. Obviously, you're going to hear some extremes on every side. But also it's very safe to assume that some of the assumptions that you or your team may be making, if you're in leadership, may also be off as well. So thank you so much again for hopping on here with me. Thank you so much for working through this. If you have any questions, please let me know. Please add me on LinkedIn. One of my favorite parts of webinars is that I get to interact with the people that are here. and expand my personal network as well. So if you have a chance to watch this, please shoot me a note on LinkedIn. Let me know what you thought. Would love to have the conversation with anyone here, and would love feedback as well. So thank you again for the time, and hope you have a great rest of your day.